You know, there's something rather peculiar that happens to people who begin to wake up, and I use that phrase very deliberately. When you start to see through the games, when you begin to understand the fundamental illusions that most of society operates under, something quite unexpected occurs. You find yourself in a rather lonely position. And this, my friends, is what I want to talk about today, the danger of outgrowing everyone around you. Now, at first glance, this sounds like rather an arrogant thing to discuss, doesn't it? Outgrowing people, as if you've become superior, as if you've climbed some ladder and left everyone else behind in the dust. But that's not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm describing is something far more subtle and, frankly, far more troubling. It's the experience of waking up in a dream where everyone else is still asleep and discovering that you can no longer participate in the dream in quite the same way. Imagine, if you will, that you've been playing a game your entire life. Let's say it's a game like Monopoly, and you've been playing it with tremendous seriousness, buying properties, building hotels, desperately trying to avoid bankruptcy. You've invested everything in this game. Your identity, your sense of worth, your relationships, all wrapped up in whether you're winning or losing at Monopoly. And then one day, quite suddenly, you have this realization. It's just a game. The money isn't real. The properties are cardboard. The rules are arbitrary, and the whole thing is fundamentally meaningless except for the meaning you've been giving it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. You look around the table, and everyone else is still playing with absolute seriousness. They're sweating, arguing, celebrating, commiserating, completely absorbed in the game. And you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't go back to taking it seriously in the way you once did. You might continue to play after all. What else are you going to do? But there's a quality of lightness, of irony, of detachment that wasn't there before. This is what happens when you begin to wake up philosophically and spiritually. You start to see that most of what people worry about, most of what drives them, most of what they identify with, it's the Monopoly game. It's the agreed-upon fiction that we're all participating in. And the moment you see through it, you become something of an outsider. The danger I'm speaking of isn't that you'll become arrogant or superior, though that is certainly a risk, and we'll come to that. The deeper danger is a kind of existential loneliness, a sense of being fundamentally out of step with the people around you, even the people you love. Because when your framework for understanding reality shifts, when the things that matter to you change, when you can no longer get excited about the things that excite others or worried about the things that worry them, a gap opens up. And that gap can feel like a chasm. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. You go to a dinner party. People are discussing their careers with great intensity, promotions, office politics, who said what to whom. And you're sitting there thinking, but don't you see, you're trading the hours of your life, the irreplaceable moments of your existence, for symbols in a bank account, for status in a hierarchy that's completely made up. But you don't say this because you know it would sound either pompous or mad. So you nod and smile, and perhaps contribute some pleasantry, but inside there's this growing sense of disconnection. Or perhaps your friends are consumed with worry about their social media presence, how many likes they got, what image they're projecting, how they compare to others, and you want to shake them and say, you're hypnotizing yourself, you're creating a prison of your own making. But again, you don't, because you know it won't help. They're not ready to hear it. They're still in the game, and you're trying to tell them it's a game, which from inside the game sounds absolutely nonsensical. This is the predicament. You haven't necessarily become better than anyone else. In fact, you may have simply traded one set of illusions for another, more subtle set. But you have changed. Your center of gravity has shifted. And the conversations, the concerns, the dramas that once animated your life now feel strangely hollow. Now, here's where we must be very, very careful. Because there's a tremendous temptation when you find yourself in this position to conclude that you are somehow special, that you've got it, and everyone else is blind. This is the trap of spiritual pride, and it's perhaps the most insidious trap of all. Because the moment you think you've transcended the ego has simply found a more sophisticated way to assert itself. Look at me, it says, I'm so spiritual, so awakened, so beyond all these petty concerns, and in that very moment you've fallen back into exactly the same trap you thought you'd escaped, only now it's worse, because it's disguised as wisdom. The truth is far more humbling. Everyone is exactly where they need to be. The people still playing the game with utter seriousness are no more wrong than you are right. They're simply at a different point in the dance. And who's to say that your realization, your awakening, is even a step forward? Perhaps it's simply a step sideways. Perhaps the person absorbed in their career is experiencing something you've forgotten how to experience. A certain kind of commitment, a passionate engagement with life, even if that engagement is with something ultimately ephemeral. You see, the real wisdom isn't in transcending the game. It's in understanding that transcending the game is itself just another move in the game. It's games all the way down, my friends. Or to put it differently, it's all the divine play, the Leela, the cosmic drama in which the universe pretends to be separate things in order to have the experience of relationship, of conflict, of reunion. But understanding this intellectually and living with the experiential reality of outgrowing your social world are two very different things. The loneliness is real. The sense of alienation is real. You can philosophize about it all you want, but when you're lying in bed at night, feeling fundamentally disconnected from everyone you know, the philosophy doesn't necessarily help very much. So what do? How do you live with this? Well, first of all, you have to resist the temptation to become a missionary. One of the most common mistakes people make when they have some kind of awakening is they immediately want to go out and wake everyone else up. They become preachy, insufferable. They can't have a conversation without trying to enlighten people. And this, of course, accomplishes nothing except to alienate people even further. You cannot drag someone into a realization. You cannot argue someone into awareness. The more you push, the more they'll resist, because you're essentially invalidating their entire framework for making sense of the world. The Buddha understood this. He didn't go around telling everyone they were idiots for being attached. He waited. He spoke when people were ready to listen. He taught through questions and stories, not through lectures. And even then, he acknowledged that some people simply weren't ready, and that was perfectly fine. So the first thing is, let people be where they are. Love them there. Participate in their world to whatever degree you can authentically do so. Don't withdraw into some tower of spiritual isolation, looking down on the unenlightened masses. That's not wisdom. That's just loneliness, dressed up as superiority. But second, and this is crucial, you must find your tribe. You must seek out the others who have had similar realizations, who are asking similar questions, who are living with similar struggles, because the isolation of awakening is not meant to be permanent. It's a transition, a liminal space between one way of being and another. And while you're in that space, you need companions. Not followers, not disciples, not people you can lecture, but fellow travelers who understand the territory because they've been walking through it themselves. This is why spiritual communities have always formed throughout history, not because enlightened people are cliquish or exclusive, but because there's a fundamental human need to be understood, to be met where you are, to speak openly about what you're experiencing without having to translate everything into terms that won't alarm or confuse people. When you're with others who have seen through the game, you can relax in a way you simply cannot relax elsewhere. You can say, isn't it strange how seriously everyone takes things that are ultimately so ephemeral? And instead of getting blank stares or defensive reactions, you get knowing nods and perhaps even laughter. But here's the thing, and this is delicate. Even within these communities, you must be careful not to create a new game, a new hierarchy, a new set of illusions. Because what often happens is that spiritual seekers simply trade the conventional game for a spiritual game. Instead of competing for money and status, they compete for who's more enlightened, who meditates longer, who has the deeper realizations, who's less attached. And they end up just as trapped as before. Only now they're trapped in a game that's harder to see through because it's disguised as freedom. The real maturity comes when you can hold it all lightly. When you can be with people who are still deeply invested in the conventional game without needing them to wake up. When you can participate in the spiritual community without getting caught in spiritual one-upmanship. When you can move between worlds, speaking the language of each without losing your center. Think of it this way. When you were a child, you played children's games with absolute seriousness. Hopscotch, tag, make-believe, these were matters of tremendous importance. And then you grew up and those games lost their power over you. But a truly mature adult can play with children and enter into their games with genuine delight, even while knowing they're just games. They don't stand apart saying, this is silly, this is meaningless. They don't refuse to play because they've transcended such childish things. They play fully and joyfully while simultaneously holding the awareness that it's play. This is the art you must develop, the ability to be in the world without being of it, as the old saying goes, to participate in the dance while knowing it's a dance, to take things seriously when seriousness is appropriate without being captured by that seriousness, to be light without being flippant, to be detached without being cold. Now, there's another dimension to this danger of outgrowing everyone around you, and it has to do with relationships, particularly intimate relationships. Because you can find a spiritual community, you can find fellow seekers, but what happens when your partner, your spouse, your closest friends haven't had the same shift in perspective that you've had? What happens when the person you've built your life with is still deeply invested in the game, and you're no longer playing in the same way? This is where it gets truly difficult, because love doesn't disappear just because your worldview changes. You don't stop caring about someone because they haven't had the same realization you've had. But the quality of the connection changes. There's a way in which you can no longer meet each other in the same place. The conversations that once bonded you may now feel superficial. The dreams you once shared may now seem naive or misguided to you. And yet there's history, there's affection, there's commitment. Some relationships survive this transition. The partners find a way to honor each other's journey, to create space for different perspectives while maintaining their bond. They discover that love doesn't require identical worldviews. In fact, they may find that the difference becomes interesting, even enriching. The person who's woken up can help the partner question their assumptions, while the partner who's still engaged in the conventional world can help the awakened one stay grounded, stay connected to practical reality. But other relationships don't survive. The gap becomes too wide. The awakened person feels constantly stifled, unable to speak their truth, forced to pretend an enthusiasm they don't feel. The other person feels abandoned, confused, perhaps even judged. They sense the withdrawal, the disconnection, and it breeds resentment. You've changed, they say. And you have, but you can't go back, and they can't understand why you would want to change in the first place. There's no easy answer here, no formula. Some people choose to stay, to work with the tension, to see the relationship itself as part of their spiritual practice, an opportunity to love without requiring the other person to be different. Others choose to leave, to honor their own evolution even at the cost of the relationship. Both paths have their wisdom and their suffering. What I can tell you is this: whatever you choose, do it consciously. Don't drift into resentment. Don't martyr yourself. Don't abandon someone out of spiritual impatience or the desire to find someone on your level. But also don't betray yourself. Don't shrink yourself. Don't pretend to be who you were simply to keep the peace. Navigate it with as much awareness and compassion as you can muster for yourself and for the other person. Because here's the ultimate truth about outgrowing people: you haven't really outgrown them at all. You've simply changed the lens through which you see reality. And from a wider perspective, from the view of the totality, no one is ahead or behind. We're all the universe experiencing itself in different forms at different frequencies. The person completely absorbed in their career ambitions is the universe playing that game. You, with your philosophical detachment, are the universe playing this game. Neither is superior. Both are necessary movements in the cosmic dance. The danger, then, isn't really that you'll outgrow everyone. The danger is that you'll think you have, and in thinking so, you'll cut yourself off from the very humanity you're trying to understand. You'll create an artificial separation between the awakened you and the unawakened them. And in that separation, you'll lose something precious, the understanding that we're all in this together, that every level of consciousness is part of the whole, that the game players and the game observers are both needed. The mystics throughout history have understood this. After their great awakenings, after their profound realizations, they came back down the mountain. They returned to the marketplace. They lived among ordinary people, doing ordinary things, because they understood that enlightenment isn't about escaping the world. It's about being fully present in it while not being fooled by it. Zen has a beautiful sequence of images called the 10 ox herding pictures, which illustrate the stages of awakening. In the early pictures, you're searching for the ox, which represents your true nature. Then you find it, tame it, ride it. There's a picture where both you and the ox disappear, complete transcendence. But the final picture, it's called returning to the marketplace with helping hands. It shows a simple person, often depicted as a laughing monk, mingling with ordinary people in the town square. After all that seeking, all that awakening, you come back to where you started. But you're different. You see it differently. You're in the world, but not trapped by it. This is the resolution to the danger of outgrowing everyone. You don't stay in the transcendent state, looking down from your spiritual heights. You return, you engage, you bring what you've learned back into the world, but you do it with humility, with humor, with love. You understand that your realization doesn't make you special. It simply gives you a different way of being present. And perhaps most importantly, you learn to recognize that the people around you, the ones you thought you'd outgrown, have their own wisdom that you may have overlooked in your rush to transcend. The mother completely absorbed in caring for her children. Isn't there something profound in that total dedication, that selfless love, even if she's not philosophizing about the nature of reality? The businessman working 80 hours a week to build something, isn't there a kind of meditation in that focus, that commitment, even if he calls it ambition rather than practice? You see, the great trap of awakening is believing that insight is superior to innocence, that knowledge is better than not knowing, that detachment is wiser than engagement. But life requires all of these. The universe needs people who are completely absorbed in the game, just as much as it needs people who see through it. The dreamer and the awakened one are playing complementary roles in the same production. I'm reminded of a story about a Zen master who was asked by a student, "What did you do before enlightenment?" The master replied, "I chopped wood and carried water." The student then asked, "And what do you do after enlightenment?" The master smiled and said, "I chop wood and carry water." The student was puzzled. "Then what's the difference?" And the master said, "The difference is that before enlightenment, I was forced to chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, I just chop wood and carry water." Do you see the subtlety? The actions are the same. The life looks the same from the outside, but the quality of consciousness is completely different. Before awakening, you're driven by compulsion, by the belief that you must do these things to survive, to succeed, to be somebody. After awakening, you do them because this is what's happening now, not out of compulsion, but out of simple presence. And this, finally, is how you live with the experience of having outgrown your previous world. You continue to chop wood and carry water. You continue to have conversations about ordinary things. You continue to participate in the social world, the work world, the family world. But you do it all with a different flavor, with more space, with more humor, with less urgency and more presence. You stop needing people to understand you completely. You stop requiring validation for your realizations. You stop seeking others who will confirm that you're right and they're wrong. Instead, you meet people where they are. You speak their language when appropriate. You share your perspective when invited. And you're comfortable with the fact that many people won't understand, won't relate, won't be interested, and that's perfectly fine. There's a beautiful freedom in this. When you stop needing people to be different than they are, when you stop needing them to wake up on your schedule, when you stop treating your own awakening as a badge of superiority, the loneliness begins to dissolve. Not because people suddenly understand you better, but because you're no longer requiring them to. You're no longer standing apart, waiting for them to catch up. You're simply here now with whoever is present, doing whatever is being done. And sometimes, quite naturally, you'll find yourself in conversations with people who are asking similar questions, who are experiencing similar shifts, and there will be this wonderful recognition, this meeting of minds and hearts, but you won't be clinging to those connections as the only real ones. You'll appreciate them as a particular flavor of relating, one among many. The danger of outgrowing everyone around you is only dangerous if you believe in the story of outgrowing. If you believe that you're now operating at a higher level and they're stuck on a lower level. But what if there are no levels? What if there's just this infinite multidimensional dance and we're all moving in different patterns and every pattern is exactly what it needs to be? From this perspective, you haven't outgrown anyone. You've simply changed your rhythm. And rather than judging the rhythms around you as inferior or outdated, you can appreciate the symphony. You can hear how your new rhythm plays against the old rhythms. You can find the beauty in the complexity, the richness in the diversity. This doesn't mean you won't feel lonely sometimes. You probably will, because human beings have this deep desire to be fully understood, to be completely met. And the reality is that this rarely happens. Even people with very similar worldviews can't entirely grasp each other's inner experience. We're each living in our own universe, with our own particular coloring of reality. The miracle is when we can bridge those universes even partially, when we can touch across the gap of subjectivity. But loneliness, when you really look at it, isn't actually caused by being alone or misunderstood. It's caused by the belief that you shouldn't be alone, that you should be understood, that something has gone wrong if you're not perfectly connected to others. It's the resistance to the actual experience of separateness that creates the suffering, not the separateness itself. When you can be with loneliness without needing it to go away, something interesting happens. It transforms. It becomes more like solitude, a spacious, peaceful aloneness rather than a painful isolation. You discover that you're actually never alone because you're always with yourself, always with this moment, always with the totality of existence. The sense of being a separate self, cut off from others, begins to feel like the illusion it is. And paradoxically, when you're comfortable with solitude, when you're no longer desperately seeking connection, you become more genuinely available to others. You're not relating to them out of need, out of the hunger to be understood or validated. You're relating to them out of simple human warmth, out of natural interest, out of the recognition that this too, this conversation, this moment of contact is part of the dance. So if you find yourself in this position of having outgrown your previous world, here's what I would suggest. First, be gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself for the loneliness, the disconnection, the sense of not fitting in. These are natural consequences of a shift in consciousness. They're not signs that something has gone wrong. They're simply the growing pains of evolution. Second, resist the temptation to either withdraw completely or to become missionary in your zeal to wake others up. Find the middle path. Stay engaged, but don't force it. Share when it's appropriate, but don't preach. Let your way of being speak louder than your words. Third, seek out others who are on a similar path, but don't make those connections into a new exclusivity. Don't create an us versus them division between the awakened and the unawakened. Remember that everyone is awakening at their own pace, in their own way, and some people's awakening looks like complete absorption in worldly things. Fourth, use the sense of disconnection as an opportunity to go deeper into your own being. When you can't find understanding outside, turn inward, meditate, contemplate, sit with the silence. Discover that the connection you're seeking with others is actually a reflection of a deeper connection with yourself, with existence itself. And finally, remember that all of this, the awakening, the loneliness, the struggle to relate, it's all just another chapter in the story. It's not the end point. You haven't arrived. You've simply moved to a different place in the journey. And the journey continues endlessly through territories you can't yet imagine. The danger of outgrowing everyone around you isn't really a danger at all. It's an invitation to discover a deeper way of being present, a more authentic way of relating, a more spacious way of holding your experience. It's the universe saying to you, you've mastered this level of the game. Now let's see how you handle the next one. And the next level is always the same. How can you be true to your own realization while remaining open, loving, and connected to those who haven't had that realization? How can you honor your own evolution without invalidating others' current state? How can you be alone without being lonely, separate without being isolated, awake without being arrogant? These aren't questions to be answered once and for all. They're koans to be lived with, worked with, played with. They're the creative challenge of being a conscious human being in a world where most of consciousness is still unconscious of itself. So, welcome this challenge, embrace it. See it not as a problem to be solved, but as an art to be practiced. You're learning to dance in a new way, and like any new dance, it feels awkward at first. You step on toes, your own and others, you lose the rhythm, you feel self-conscious and ungainly. But keep dancing, keep practicing, and gradually you'll find your grace. You'll discover how to move in the world with both groundedness and lightness. You'll learn to speak many languages, the language of the marketplace, and the language of the mystics, the language of practical affairs, and the language of the ineffable. You'll become, in the most beautiful sense, bilingual in being. And perhaps in time, you'll realize that you haven't outgrown anyone at all, You've simply grown into a larger version of yourself, one that has room for all the different levels of existence, all the different ways of being human. You've become more inclusive rather than more exclusive, more embracing rather than more separate. This is the real maturity of awakening. Not standing apart from the world in transcendent isolation, but diving back into it with renewed wonder, seeing the divine play in all its forms, including the forms that don't recognize themselves as divine, including the people who are still completely identified with their roles, their stories, their games, because in the end we're all playing our parts perfectly. The sleeper and the awakened one, the seeker and the finder, the lost and the found, all necessary movements in the cosmic dance. And when you truly see this, the loneliness dissolves into something much vaster, a sense of profound connection to everything exactly as it is. You are the universe, pretending to be a separate person, pretending to wake up, pretending to feel lonely, pretending to seek connection. And it's all perfect. It's all the game playing itself. And you can relax into that. You can stop trying so hard to be understood, to find your tribe, to resolve the tension. Just be what you are, here, now, awake or asleep, connected or alone. It's all the dance, it's all the play, it's all the one pretending to be the many, so it can have the joy of discovering itself again and again and again. And when you truly understand this, not intellectually, but in your bones, you'll find that you never outgrew anyone. You simply grew. And in growing, you made more room for everyone, exactly as they are.
There is an old saying that the truth will set you free, but before it frees you, it makes you heavy. The truthful man, wherever you find him, seems to walk under a weight invisible to others. He may not complain, he may not cry out, but there is a gravity in his presence, a solemnity in his eyes, as though he carries something no one else can quite understand. And indeed, he does. For the truthful man carries the heaviest burden of all, the refusal to live in illusion. Most people find it easier to live with masks. We present faces to one another, polished, rehearsed, agreeable. A father plays the role of the strong provider, even when he trembles inside. A friend nods along to things he does not believe, only to avoid the awkward silence of disagreement. A lover says, "I will always be here," even while knowing deep down that nothing lasts forever. These masks are lies, of course, but they are lies we accept because they protect us from discomfort. They let us belong, they let us be liked, but the truthful man cannot wear them for long. He may try, for he is human after all, but something in him revolts. He feels the itch of dishonesty like a splinter in the mind. He senses the falseness of the role and cannot rest until it is removed. And so, one by one, he lays aside the masks. At first, this feels noble, liberating. He thinks, now I can finally be real. But he soon discovers that the world does not reward reality. The world punishes it. Imagine a dinner table where everyone is speaking politely about things they do not care about: politics, the weather, the price of bread. And into that circle steps the truthful man. He cannot force his tongue to move along with their games. He does not condemn them. He simply falls silent. But his silence exposes the emptiness of the conversation, and suddenly the others are uneasy. His presence becomes a mirror they would rather avoid. This is why the truthful man carries a burden. Not because truth itself is a curse, but because it alienates him from the crowd. The world is built upon a delicate agreement. We will not disturb each other's illusions. And the truthful man, by his very nature, breaks that pact. He carries the heaviest burden because he cannot lie to himself. He cannot convince himself that wealth is happiness when he sees rich men weeping in their mansions. He cannot pretend that success is security when he knows that every victory ends in death. He cannot swallow the belief that belonging is found in imitation when his soul cries out that imitation is the death of individuality. Others can, others do. They dance to the music of the marketplace. They march to the rhythm of society's drum. They drown themselves in noise to avoid hearing the silence of truth, but the truthful man cannot. His ears are tuned to a deeper sound, and once you hear that sound, you cannot unhear it. Now, you may think, surely this man is free, for he sees what others cannot. And yes, there is freedom in truth. But freedom is not always light. Sometimes freedom is heavier than chains. Think of a prisoner released after many years. He steps into the open air, and for a moment he rejoices, but soon he trembles. For freedom requires choices, responsibility, risk. He cannot hide behind the walls any longer. He must stand on his own. So it is with truth. The liar hides behind illusion. The truthful man stands naked before reality. And reality is vast, uncertain, often merciless. This is why truth is not celebrated by the many. They prefer the comfortable shelter of lies. It is why prophets are stoned, why philosophers are ridiculed, why the honest man is mocked as naive or dangerous. His refusal to join the masquerade unsettles the dancers. And so, his freedom becomes his weight. The truthful man carries another burden too, the burden of clarity. To see things as they are means to also see the suffering that others ignore. When a man numbs himself with distractions, he can walk past the beggar in the street without a second thought. When he tells himself, "It's not my problem," he feels no sting of conscience. But the truthful man cannot turn away so easily. He sees the hunger in the beggar's eyes as if it were his own. He feels the trembling of the earth under the weight of human greed. He senses the loneliness hidden behind laughter, the despair tucked behind smiles, and all of it presses upon him. This is not to say he wallows in misery, no, but he is awake to pain. And awakening to pain means carrying it, even when it is not yours. It is like standing on a mountain where you see the whole valley. Beautiful, yes, but also terrible. You see not only the flowers, but also the graves, not only the rivers, but also the blood that stains them. To see clearly is both a gift and a wound. And so the truthful man appears heavier than others. He is not entertained by empty distractions, for he sees through them. He is not intoxicated by shallow praise, for he knows how quickly it fades. He is not comforted by hollow promises, for he knows they cannot be kept. Instead, he carries the silence of honesty, the loneliness of authenticity, the sorrow of seeing through illusions. Others dance lightly because they believe the dance is real. The truthful man walks heavily because he knows it is only a play. And when the play no longer convinces you, even laughter becomes heavy in your mouth. But here lies the paradox. The burden of truth, though heavy, is the only burden worth carrying. For what do the others carry? They carry the burden of lies, though they do not admit it. They must remember their falsehoods, repair their broken disguises, run from their own reflections. Their burden is confusion. The truthful man's burden is clarity. And though clarity weighs him down, it also steadies him. He may stumble under its heaviness, but he does not fall into the abyss of delusion. He may feel alone, but he is not lost. He may feel heavy, but he is real. And reality, though harsh, is the only ground upon which a man can truly stand. So the truthful man carries the heaviest burden, not because life is cruel, not because he is cursed, but because he refuses the cheap comfort of illusion. He would rather suffer under the weight of truth than rest lightly upon the pillow of lies. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. Though he seems burdened, though he seems lonely, though he seems weary, the truthful man, in his heaviness, is more free than the light-footed dancers of illusion. For when the dance ends, when the music fades, when the masks fall away, it is only the truthful man who will still be standing, burdened but unbroken, heavy but whole. To live truthfully is to walk without armor, and that is why the truthful man appears fragile, even weak. While others surround themselves with shields of pretense, I am strong, I am in control, I am important, he steps forward bare, unwilling to clothe himself in what he knows to be false. At first glance, this seems foolish. How can a man without armor survive in a world that worships appearances? How can the unprotected endure in a society that mistakes masks for strength? Yet here is the paradox. His lack of armor is precisely his strength. For what happens when the storm comes? What happens when the illusions crack? The man who wears false armor is shattered along with it. The truthful man, having never depended on illusions, stands firm. The burden of truth is heavy because it does not allow shortcuts. The liar can flatter to be liked, boast to be admired, pretend to be wise. He can win friends with deceit, gain power with manipulation, and soothe his conscience with distraction. The truthful man has none of these luxuries. He must take the long road, the slow road, the honest road. He must earn respect, not demand it. He must accept solitude when his honesty unsettles others. He must face consequences when his refusal to lie exposes what others would prefer to hide. This is why his steps are heavy. Every footfall is weighed with reality. And yet, this heaviness is not defeat, it is integrity. The truthful man walks with burden, yes, but each burden, carried honestly, strengthens his soul. To carry truth is also to carry solitude. You see, lies create crowds. They give us slogans to chant together, masks to wear together, illusions to share. Whole societies are built upon mutually agreed pretenses. And within them, people feel united, not because they are truly connected, but because they are collectively deceived. But the truthful man cannot join this unity. He cannot nod along when his heart says no. He cannot pretend to belong when he knows the price of belonging is the death of his authenticity. And so, he walks apart. He becomes the man at the edge of the room, the one whose silence disturbs the noise, the one who no longer laughs at empty jokes. He feels the sting of being misunderstood, the ache of being excluded, the chill of being alone. This is his burden. But it is also his refinement. For solitude, when embraced truthfully, is not emptiness but fullness. The man who is left alone with his honesty begins to hear what the crowd cannot. He hears the song of the wind, the wisdom of silence, the quiet companionship of the stars. In losing the applause of the many, he gains the intimacy of the real. The truthful man carries the heaviest burden because he is called to suffer without escape. The liar suffers too, of course, but he hides his suffering beneath distractions. He runs into the arms of entertainment, drowns himself in noise, loses himself in ambition. He refuses to look at his pain directly, and so he carries it in secret, disguised even from himself. But the truthful man has no such escape. He feels pain and admits it. He faces fear and names it. He confronts despair without the drug of denial. And so his suffering is heavier but also cleaner. Like a fire that burns hot and pure, his suffering refines him. It teaches him what matters. It strips away what is unnecessary. It forges in him a strength that cannot be faked, for it is carved directly from the stone of reality. This is why the truthful man, though heavy, is free. The liar may laugh loudly, but inside he trembles. The crowd may cheer together, but each member fears solitude. The pretender may shine for a season, but he is always running from the shadow he casts. The truthful man, however, has nothing to fear. His life may be heavy, but it is steady. His road may be lonely, but it is real. His heart may ache, but it is whole. And this wholeness, this integrity, gives him a strength that no applause, no praise, no illusion can provide. The burden of truth also transforms the way he sees others. At first, honesty isolates him, but in time, he discovers that his burden is not only his own. Everyone, in their quiet moments, senses the weight of reality. Everyone knows, somewhere deep inside, that their masks are fragile, that their illusions will one day fail. The truthful man becomes a kind of silent witness to this hidden awareness in others. He no longer despises them for their lies. He understands. He sees that their dishonesty is not cruelty, but fear. They fear what he has already accepted, the raw, unpolished face of reality. And so his burden, though heavy, ripens into compassion. He does not join their illusions, but neither does he condemn them. He carries his truth with dignity, and in doing so, he becomes a light for those who are ready to step into honesty themselves. The heaviest burden becomes the deepest gift. For in the end, what the truthful man carries is not merely his own honesty, but the possibility of honesty for everyone. By refusing to bow to illusion, he shows that it can be done. By bearing the cost of authenticity, he proves that the cost is survivable. By walking alone, he clears a path that others may one day follow, and though he may never be thanked, though his road may never be crowded, he leaves behind a trail of footprints that point toward reality. So yes, the truthful man carries the heaviest burden, but it is a burden worth carrying, for while it bends his back, it straightens his spirit. While it isolates him from the crowd, it connects him to the cosmos. While it removes his illusions, it reveals the eternal presence behind them. And when all the masks fall away, when all the pretenses collapse, when all the illusions dissolve, it will not be the liar who stands free. It will be the man who carried the burden of truth all along. There are times, you know, when life just stops making any noise inside you. You wake up, you go through the motions, you speak, you smile when necessary, but underneath it all there's this great silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that feels like the absence of everything that once made you human. And you wonder, perhaps in the middle of the night, what happened. Not what went wrong, but what simply went away. Now this, you see, is something very few people talk about honestly, because it's not quite sadness, and it's not depression in the way we describe it. It's this strange neutral state where the heart has gone quiet. It's as though life has been drained of its taste, its color, its temperature. Food doesn't move you, music doesn't move you, beauty passes by, and you say, yes, that's nice, but it doesn't reach you. And the mind, oh, the mind tries very hard to fix it. It says you're tired, or you need purpose, or you must be missing something. And so we set out again on another little quest. We read another book, we buy another thing, we start another project, and for a few moments, we feel that flicker, that little flame of being alive, and then, almost cruelly, it disappears again. Now, perhaps you've noticed that when you feel nothing at all, the temptation is to run toward something, anything that will make you feel again. And yet, the more you run, the quieter it gets inside. You start to realize that what you're trying to escape is not outside of you. It's this very absence itself. You're afraid of it. You're afraid of nothingness. Let me tell you about a man I once met after a lecture. He waited until everyone had left, and then came up to me with that sort of half smile people wear when they're holding back tears. He said, "Alan, I don't feel anything anymore. Not joy, not sorrow. It's like my life has gone flat, and I'm terrified that I've broken something inside myself." And I said, "Well, perhaps you've broken the illusion that something inside you needs to always be feeling." You see, we have this idea that feeling is proof of being alive, that to feel nothing is to be half dead. But that's not true. Sometimes to feel nothing is to stand at the very edge of transformation, because feeling nothing is what happens when the old ways of responding no longer make sense. When the machinery of your personality, all the habits, all the emotional reflexes have finally worn out. And so, for a while, you're left in this strange twilight. You're not who you were, but you haven't yet discovered who you are. And in that interval, it feels like a kind of death. The Buddhists have a word for this, shunyata, emptiness. Not emptiness as in despair, but emptiness as in spaciousness, as in a room cleared out so that something new might enter. But we in the West, we've never been very good at letting rooms stay empty. We rush to fill them with noise, with company, with goals. We can't bear the echo, and yet it's precisely that echo that begins to teach us something. Because when you finally stop running from it, you start to hear something softer within the silence. You start to notice that this nothing is not hostile. It's not an enemy. It's a space. And in that space, you are still there. You haven't vanished. You're simply resting from the performance of being someone. Now, if you've ever truly felt this kind of emptiness, you know it can't be solved by self-improvement. You can meditate, journal, change your diet, change your surroundings, and yet the silence remains. That's because the silence is not a problem. It's a teacher. Think of it like the winter of the soul. In winter, the trees look dead, the ground is cold, lifeless. But what's really happening is not death, it's incubation. Life is gathering itself unseen beneath the surface, waiting for the right season to emerge again. But if you were to judge the tree in winter, you'd say, it's over, it's finished. And that's what we do to ourselves when we feel nothing. We think something's gone wrong, but what's really happening is that the part of us that used to be moved by certain things no longer needs to be. That version of us has outlived its time. And so we call it numbness, but perhaps it's simply ripening. Now, of course, when I say this, people sometimes protest. They say, but Alan, if I don't feel, how can I love? How can I care? How can I live meaningfully? And I say, my dear, what if love itself is larger than feeling? What if caring doesn't always come with passion, but sometimes with quiet presence? What if meaning is what remains when you stop demanding life to feel a certain way? You see, we've confused feeling with aliveness, and in doing so, we've made aliveness terribly fragile. We think that to be alive means to be excited, inspired, passionate, moved, but that's just one flavor of it. There's another kind still, vast. Clear the aliveness of simply being aware. When you begin to realize this, the fear starts to ease. You no longer demand that every moment sparkle. You stop accusing yourself of being broken because you're not laughing or crying or thrilled. You start to see that there is peace in neutrality. There's a strange beauty in not needing life to perform for you. And in that moment, the numbness becomes softer. It begins to open like a shell. You start to feel not emotion, but presence. The texture of air, the sound of your own breathing, the subtle rhythm of existence. You see, when you stop searching for fireworks, you start noticing the candlelight. Now, the man I mentioned earlier, the one who said he felt nothing, he wrote to me a few months later. He said, I still feel nothing extraordinary, but it doesn't frighten me anymore. I go on my walks, I watch the sky, and sometimes I feel something small, something quiet. Not joy, exactly, more like belonging. And that, I think, is the beginning of awakening, because the heart doesn't reopen through force, it reopens through gentleness. When you stop demanding to feel alive, life returns to you in the most unassuming ways. It's rather like the way a wild animal returns to the forest after a storm. It waits until everything is still. If you go thrashing about shouting, come back, it will hide deeper. But if you sit quietly, not needing it, not forcing it, eventually it appears again curious, cautious, alive. And so it is with the human spirit. When you stop chasing feeling, feeling finds you. You see, most of our suffering comes from thinking we've lost something that was never ours to begin with. We say, I've lost my spark, or I've lost my joy, as though joy were an object you could misplace. But you never had it. It was never a possession. It was a rhythm and you were dancing to it. When the music changes, the body pauses. But the pause is not the end of the dance. It's part of it. The silence you fear is part of life's rhythm. The space between notes makes the music possible. Now, perhaps, if you're in that space right now, the worst thing anyone can tell you is cheer up or find your passion again, because they don't understand that what's happening isn't a problem to solve, it's an unfolding to witness. So instead of asking, how do I feel again? Ask, can I stay here long enough to see what this silence has to show me? Because if you can, you will start to notice that even in the emptiness, something subtle moves, awareness itself. And that, my dear, is life quietly breathing through you, even when you feel nothing at all. You see, we've been taught to think of awareness as a servant of feeling, as though being aware is only useful when it's filled with excitement or meaning. But awareness doesn't need a reason, it simply is. It's the background upon which all feelings appear and disappear. And when the feelings are gone, the awareness remains, quietly watching. So when you say, I feel nothing, what's actually happening is this. Awareness is still there, but it's no longer occupied. It's no longer being fed by the usual dramas and desires. It's as though the theater of your life has gone dark, the actors have gone home, and you're sitting in the empty hall, listening to the quiet. And at first, it feels lonely, intolerably so. But if you stay, if you resist the urge to switch the lights back on, something extraordinary begins to happen. You realize that the silence is alive. That's the strange thing. The silence, which seems so empty, starts to hum with a kind of invisible fullness. You notice the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog, the feeling of your own pulse in your hands. You start to sense the world breathing around you. And you think, well, nothing's happening, but in that nothing, everything is. This is what the mystics have been trying to tell us for centuries. That nothingness is not the absence of life. It's the presence of all life before we name it. It's the womb of experience. It's where the next form of you is forming. But the trouble is, most people never stay long enough to see it. They feel the first chill of emptiness and run back to the fire of distraction. They turn on a screen, call a friend, make plans, anything to drown the echo, because silence to the ego feels like death. And in a sense it is. The death of the ego's constant need to be entertained, to be validated, to be in control. But that's the death that makes space for something much wider, something that doesn't come and go with moods or circumstances. Now, perhaps you've noticed this paradox. When you finally stop trying to feel something, the world starts to feel you. The sunset, which you used to chase for beauty, now simply happens, and it touches you without effort. The sound of rain doesn't inspire emotion, it is emotion without the label. Even boredom becomes strangely peaceful. This is the beginning of what I would call true feeling, not the noisy kind that rises and falls like waves, but the still kind that underlies the sea, the feeling of existence itself. But it's not easy to recognize this, because our culture has told us since birth that value comes from intensity. We admire passion, energy, enthusiasm. We say, he's so full of life. But we forget that even the stars burn themselves out. And what remains afterward is not death, it's vast, quiet space. So if you are in that quiet now, if you've grown tired of striving and still find no joy, I say, good, you're on the right track. Because you are beginning to see through the illusion that feeling something is better than seeing clearly. There is a peculiar story I remember from a student of mine, a woman who had spent years chasing inspiration. She told me, Alan, I used to paint every day, and it filled me with meaning. But now I stand before the canvas and feel nothing. I've lost my gift. And I said, maybe you've lost the gift of ambition, not the gift of seeing. Try to paint without meaning. A few weeks later, she sent me a small painting, a simple one. A white bowl on a wooden table, sunlight touching the rim. There was no message, no drama, but it was alive in a way her earlier work wasn't. You could feel the quiet. She wrote, I think I understand now. I don't paint to express anymore. I paint to listen. And that's it, you see. That's the movement from striving to seeing, from expression to presence. The world becomes not something you decorate with meaning, but something you participate in wordlessly. Now, the interesting thing is that when you stop trying to feel and you start allowing the nothingness, emotion returns on its own. It's softer, humbler. It's no longer a performance. It's like when the snow melts, the earth doesn't have to try to be fertile. It just is. The same happens in the human heart. When the ice of exhaustion melts, feeling flows again. Not the dramatic kind that sweeps you away, but the kind that roots you in being. But to reach that point, you must be willing to sit in the winter, to let the numbness teach you what false feelings have been carrying you all this time. And that's the secret most people never discover, that numbness is not the absence of emotion, but the exhaustion of pretending. You've spent years being what the world asked you to be, excited, loving, productive, optimistic, spiritual even. Each of those roles drains the battery of the soul, and when the performance ends, the silence that follows is the sound of truth returning. But because no one tells you this, you think something's wrong. You say, why can't I go back? But you can't go back to pretending because you've seen too much. The numbness is not punishment, it's protection. It's your spirit saying, enough, let's just be. And when you surrender to that, when you stop demanding fireworks, something gentler appears. You start noticing the smallest movements, the sound of a kettle, the warmth of light on your hand. These tiny things, once ignored, now shimmer with a quiet importance. It's as though the universe is whispering, I'm still here. You see, feeling doesn't begin when the heart races. It begins when you stop racing. The most profound feelings often appear in disguise, not as joy, but as stillness, not as excitement, but as peace. And then one day, quite suddenly, you'll find yourself crying over nothing at all, the way the leaves move, the way a stranger laughs, the way sunlight hits a wall. And you'll realize that the nothing you feared was never empty. It was holding everything you were too busy to feel. So if you are here now, walking through this strange landscape of quiet, don't rush to leave it. Don't mistake it for apathy or failure. You are not broken. You are becoming real. The world you once knew was built on noise. And silence, at first, feels like loss, but it's only clearing the ground for truth. Every seed feels buried before it grows. So let the numbness be your soil. Let it cover you, hold you, and trust that what looks like emptiness is just the space life needs to begin again. Because one day, you will wake up and realize that nothing has changed and yet everything feels alive again. The same sky, the same faces, the same world, but you are seeing it from beyond the veil of meaning. You are no longer trying to extract feeling from life, you are letting life feel through you. And that, you see, is the difference between being alive and knowing you are alive. When you've sat in the stillness long enough, something begins to move again. Not the mind that's been running all along, but something deeper. Something that stirs beneath the surface like the first ripple on a frozen pond. It doesn't come as fireworks or revelation. It comes as warmth. A faint warmth that feels almost fragile at first, like the light of dawn before the sun rises. You can't quite explain it. Nothing in your life has changed. You're still the same person, sitting in the same chair, looking at the same world. But something in the way you see has shifted. The silence that once frightened you now feels intimate. The emptiness that once felt hollow now feels safe. as though you're resting in the hands of something vast. And then it hits you, this is what you were running from all along. Not the pain, not the sadness, but the simplicity of being. Because to simply be is to give up control. It's to stop managing your own aliveness and let it unfold on its own terms. It's a humbling thing to realize that life doesn't need your constant supervision, that the heart beats without your permission, that breath moves in and out without your will. And when you stop interfering, you see that the world has always known how to take care of itself. We imagine ourselves as the authors of our experience, but really, we are the readers. The story is already written in the language of time and change, and our only task is to read it aloud with wonder. The reason most people can't feel is not because they're empty, but because they're trying to write faster than they can read. They're trying to force meaning into a moment that hasn't yet revealed itself. But meaning is not a thing you make, it's something you notice when you stop trying to manufacture it. You may recall a time in your life when you laughed so hard you forgot yourself, or looked at the ocean and felt both small and infinite. That's the moment you stopped thinking about life and started being with it. That's the return we're all aching for, the home we keep leaving without knowing. And you begin to see that even your numbness was part of that homecoming. It stripped you of everything that wasn't real, your ambitions, your self-image, even your spirituality, until only awareness remained. That's why people mistake awakening for emptiness at first. Because awakening isn't adding light to the darkness, it's realizing the darkness was light all along, misunderstood. You can't awaken from something that isn't dreaming. And the dream, you see, is this endless pursuit of how you think you're supposed to feel. But when you wake, even slightly, you see that every state, joy, sorrow, confusion, numbness, was never a mistake. It was all life exploring itself through different textures. You are not supposed to always feel vibrant. You are supposed to feel alive, which includes the quiet, the empty, the lost, and the tender. Now, the remarkable thing is that when this understanding starts to sink in, love appears. Not the romantic kind, not even the emotional kind, but the kind that feels like gravity. A quiet recognition that everything belongs. The mistakes, the silences, the parts of you tried to fix, all of it was already part of the dance. You start forgiving yourself without effort, because you see there's nothing left to forgive. The one who made the mistakes no longer exists. That version of you was doing its best with the light it had. And this love, this quiet, unconditional recognition begins to color everything. You see the world not as a set of problems to solve, but as a constant movement of form and disappearance. And you realize nothing ever truly leaves. Things change, yes, but disappearance is only transformation by another name. This is when feeling returns, but it doesn't arrive as drama, it arrives as grace. The way water returns to the earth, not with thunder, but with rain. You find yourself feeling moved by small things, again, a bird pausing on the window, the sound of someone laughing nearby, the weight of your own breath. You don't chase these moments. They appear naturally, like reflections in still water. And then you understand feeling was never gone. You were simply looking for it in the wrong direction. You were looking outward toward the world of sensations and meanings, when all along it was waiting inward in the stillness that never left. When you stop running from nothingness, you find it's the only place peace has ever lived. And that peace is not an experience, but a condition of being the natural state beneath the noise. It doesn't depend on mood, achievement, or clarity. It's the quiet recognition that everything you touch is temporary, and that this is not a tragedy, but the very reason life can be beautiful. Because if everything stayed, nothing would move, and if nothing moved, there could be no experience at all. So feeling nothing for a time is life teaching you how to stop confusing movement with meaning. It's the pause between the notes that lets the music breathe. You begin to live differently when you know this. You stop grasping at pleasure and stop running from pain. You begin to trust the seasons of your own spirit. When joy comes, you welcome it, but when silence returns, you don't fight it, you make tea for it. And when you look back, you see that what you called numbness was really a teacher in disguise. It came to strip away what was false, so that what was true could finally be felt. I remember once a man asked me, "Alan, how do I find peace?" And I said, "Stop looking for it as something to find. Start seeing it as what remains when the search ends." The man said, "Then should I do nothing?" And I smiled. Doing nothing is still doing something. The trick is to stop trying to do nothing and allow yourself to be what is already happening. This puzzled him, as it does most of us. But later he wrote to me saying, "I sat by the river for hours and nothing happened until I realized that the river was doing all the happening." That's it. When you stop trying to force life, you realize life has been living you all along. The numbness fades not because you escape it, but because you stop naming it. When you stop calling it emptiness, it becomes space. When you stop calling it loneliness, it becomes presence. When you stop calling it meaninglessness, it becomes freedom. And then one day you notice you're smiling again, not for any reason, but because the breeze feels like a friend. Because the moment, however small, feels like home. The return of feeling is quiet, humble, and profoundly ordinary. It doesn't arrive with music or revelation. It arrives as a soft knowing that you were never separate from the flow. That everything, even your detachment, was part of life's way of holding you until you were ready to soften again. So, if you feel nothing now, do not despair. You are standing at the threshold of your own awakening. You are learning how to feel without the drama, to love without the story, to live without the noise. And the beauty of it all is that life doesn't rush you. It waits, endlessly patient, until you are ready to remember. Because the truth is, life was never trying to make you feel something. It was trying to show you that you are what's feeling itself. Not a person having an emotion, but awareness meeting its own reflection. And once you see that, once you truly understand that the silence inside you is not a void but a mirror, you realize you've never been alone. You've only been looking away. When you sit quietly, you begin to sense that there is a pulse beneath everything, a rhythm so subtle that only stillness can hear it. And that pulse is the universe breathing through you. You realize you don't need to find connection because you are connection. You don't need to chase purpose because purpose is simply the act of being awake to this. Feeling nothing was never a problem to solve. It was a doorway through which you step, leaving behind the noise of identity and entering the space where being and feeling are one and the same. And when you walk through that door, life no longer happens to you. It happens as you. The rain falls, and you are the rain. The wind moves, and you are the wind. The world breathes, and you are the breath. You are the silence listening to itself. So, if you are feeling nothing at all, know this: you are closer to truth than you've ever been. Stay there, let it open, and soon enough, you will see that nothing was ever missing. You were simply being prepared to see the everything that was always here. Because in the stillest moment, when all else fades away, you'll finally understand nothing was wrong, nothing was broken, nothing was missing. It was all just life unfolding quietly until you were ready to feel again. There comes a point in every life when the applause fades, when the noise of the crowd grows distant, and you find yourself walking through a silence that feels almost foreign. At first, you might resist it. You may think that something has gone wrong, that you have fallen behind, that you've been forgotten by the world. But perhaps what has really happened is that life has drawn back its curtain so that you may see yourself as you truly are, without the distractions, without the mirrors, without the endless performance of being someone for someone else. You see, for most of our lives, we are surrounded by noise, expectations, judgments, comparisons, and we mistake this noise for meaning. We think that being noticed is the same as being alive. But there comes a moment, and it comes to everyone sooner or later, when the world stops looking at you, when you are left to look at yourself. And in that moment, you are faced with the most extraordinary invitation to discover that your worth was never dependent on an audience at all. We are taught from an early age that validation is a kind of currency, that to be loved is to be seen, and to be seen is to be successful. A child brings home a drawing and looks not at the drawing, but at the parent's face, searching for approval. A student studies not for the joy of learning, but for the grade, for the pat on the back, for the fleeting sense of being enough. And as adults, we continue this pattern without realizing it. We chase recognition, praise, applause. We mistake attention for affection and admiration for understanding. But all of this, though it feels like progress, is a subtle form of dependence. It ties your peace to the whims of others, your sense of value to the ever-shifting moods of the crowd. The tragedy is that in seeking affirmation from others, you lose connection with the quiet, steady affirmation of life itself, the simple fact that you are here, breathing, being, existing. That alone is the original validation. There is something sacred about walking through the fog when no one is beside you and no one is watching. It is in that loneliness that you begin to hear what cannot be heard in the noise of company, the rhythm of your own heartbeat, the quiet pulse of existence that has been speaking to you all along. We spend so much time trying to be understood that we forget to understand ourselves. But it is in solitude that understanding ripens. When there is no one to impress, you start to see yourself clearly. You start to notice the small things, the way your mind moves, the way your heart responds, the way life unfolds around you, even when you are not trying to control it. The silence, which at first seemed empty, begins to feel full of insight, full of presence, full of life. You see, loneliness is not the absence of others. It is the discovery of yourself in the absence of others. It is the universe saying, now, at last, you are ready to meet who you truly are. We treat solitude as a punishment, but it is the first and greatest teacher. When there is no one to depend on, you begin to depend on the stillness within. When there is no one to cheer you on, you discover that the act of moving forward is its own applause. This is the secret hidden in plain sight. The journey is the reward. Every small effort, every unseen victory, every quiet act of persistence, these are the milestones of real growth. They may not earn you applause, but they build something far greater, a quiet strength that no one can give and no one can take away. We've been taught to think of life as a competition, a ladder to climb, a race to win. But this way of thinking creates an endless hunger, a thirst that cannot be quenched. We compare ourselves to others, measure our worth by their approval, and in doing so, we make ourselves miserable. The Buddha called this craving tanha, the thirst that binds us to suffering. And the only way to end it is not by acquiring more approval, but by seeing through the illusion of needing it. The moment you stop trying to prove yourself, you begin to live freely. You realize that you were never behind, that you were never lacking. You were simply caught in the trance of comparison. Think for a moment about a flower growing in the forest. It blooms quietly, unseen by anyone, and yet it blooms all the same. It does not question whether it is worthy. It does not demand recognition. It simply fulfills its nature to blossom, to be. And in that simple act, it participates fully in the miracle of existence. The flower does not bloom for the world. It blooms because blooming is what life does through it. You, too, are such a flower. You do not need to be admired to be alive. You do not need to be seen to be real. Life itself is seeing through your eyes, breathing through your lungs, moving through your steps. The universe is aware of you because you are the universe aware of itself. But because we forget this, we go seeking mirrors. We ask others to tell us who we are, what we're worth, whether we're enough. Yet every mirror we find is distorted. People see us not as we are, but as they are. Their opinions reflect their own fears and desires more than our truth. And so, if you live for approval, you will live in distortion. You will twist yourself to fit images that were never yours, and in doing so, you will abandon your authenticity. True freedom comes when you stop needing mirrors, when you realize that you are both the reflection and the light that makes reflection possible. That is the beginning of real maturity, to become your own witness, your own source of affirmation. There is a kind of discipline that grows out of this understanding, but it is not the discipline of force. It is the discipline of love. You rise each day not because you must, but because something in you honors the unfolding of life. You take the next step not because someone is watching, but because walking itself is sacred. You work, you create, you try, you fail, and you begin again, not because the world demands it, but because that is the rhythm of being alive. To live this way is to be free from both praise and blame. It is to see that success and failure are not opposites, but phases of the same movement, like the crest and trough of a wave. When you fail, you learn. When you learn, you grow. And growth, in its own quiet way, is success. Imagine a potter shaping clay. Each time the bowl collapses, he does not despair. He simply gathers the clay again, softens it, and begins anew. The cracks and imperfections become part of the art. In Japan, they repair broken pottery with gold, a practice called kintsugi, because they understand that the object's history adds to its beauty. Likewise, every time you fall, every time you are unseen or uncelebrated, the gold of experience fills your cracks. You become more whole, not less, more luminous, not dimmer. This is how the universe makes art out of you. The great mistake is to wait for motivation, to believe that we must feel inspired before we act. But motivation is like the weather, it comes and goes without warning. Discipline, on the other hand, is like the sun. It may hide behind clouds, but it never ceases to shine. Real discipline is not about control, it is about trust. It is faith in the process of your own unfolding. Even when you cannot see progress, something within you is maturing, deepening, preparing to bloom again. The tree in winter looks lifeless, but beneath the surface, roots are growing, drawing strength from the earth. So when your life feels quiet, when nothing seems to be happening, know that something essential is taking root. The silence you fear is not the absence of life, it is the presence of everything. Sit quietly, and you'll begin to feel it. The hum of existence, the gentle awareness that watches your thoughts rise and fall like waves. That awareness is who you are. Not the thoughts, not the emotions, but the space in which they appear. Once you see this, you realize that you were never truly alone. Even in solitude, life is with you. You are with you, and that is enough. You may wonder, what about the people who left? What about the ones who didn't see me, who didn't believe in me? But perhaps they were never meant to. Perhaps their absence is part of your awakening, a clearing of the space so that you might meet yourself without distraction. When you are no longer trying to convince anyone of your worth, you begin to live from it. You begin to create from it. You begin to love from it. And that is a power no applause can give you. To be unseen is not to be forgotten. The seed buried in darkness is not neglected. It is becoming. And when the time is right, it breaks the soil, not to prove anything, but because that is its nature. So too with you. You are growing in ways that the world may not yet recognize. You are unfolding according to a rhythm far deeper than public validation. And one day, without fanfare, you will realize that you no longer need to get ahead because you are already ahead. You are not waiting for life to begin. You are living it fully right now. So when you find yourself walking alone, do not despair. Do not rush to escape the quiet. Sit with it. Listen. The silence is speaking. It is saying, you are already home. There comes a time when you realize that being unseen has given you the greatest gift of all, space. The space to listen, to breathe, to exist without performing. Most people live their entire lives afraid of that space. They fill it with noise, with work, with chatter, with distractions. They keep the television on, the phone buzzing, the mind spinning anything to avoid being left alone with themselves. But it is only in that aloneness that something begins to awaken. Because the silence you fear is not emptiness. It is fullness so vast that your little identity trembles before it. When you stop running from it, you begin to see that everything you were looking for in the eyes of others has been looking out through your eyes all along. You see, the entire problem of loneliness is based on a misunderstanding. You think you are a fragment cut off from the rest of the world, and so you seek connection, attention, affirmation, as if these were bridges that could return you to the whole. But you were never separate in the first place. You are like a wave asking the ocean where the water went. Every breath you take, every heartbeat, every thought arises from the same field of being that moves the stars. When you understand this, the idea that you are alone becomes as absurd as the idea of a sunbeam being separate from the sun. You were never disconnected, you simply forgot the truth of your belonging. The irony of striving is that the harder you chase connection, the further you drift from it. You cannot grasp what you already are. The more you reach for validation, the more you affirm the illusion of incompleteness. But when you relax, when you surrender, when you stop trying to prove yourself, a remarkable thing happens. Life begins to hold you again. It's as if existence was waiting for you to stop struggling so it could show you that you were never unsupported. The Taoists call this Wu Wei, effortless action. It is not laziness but harmony. It is the art of moving with life rather than against it. When you learn to live this way, even the most ordinary moments shimmer with quiet perfection. Washing dishes, walking in the rain, sitting in stillness, all become sacred because you are fully there. Most people think that freedom is something to be earned, that they must struggle for it, plan for it, fight for it. But freedom is the natural state of being once you stop pretending to be what you are not. You cannot manufacture freedom any more than you can manufacture the sky. You simply remove the clouds that hide it. Those clouds are made of fear, doubt, comparison, and the need for control. And when you stop feeding them, they dissolve on their own. Then, without effort, the vastness of who you are shines through. That vastness is not something you become, it is something you remember. Think of how a musician learns an instrument. At first, there is tension, effort, striving. Every movement feels clumsy. But over time, the musician relaxes into the rhythm. The fingers know what to do without thought. The music plays itself. That is what life is like when you stop trying to control it. You stop thinking about living and start living. You stop forcing and start flowing. The universe has been composing through you all along. It only needed you to stop interrupting the melody. To get ahead, then, is not to outpace others, but to outgrow your illusions. It is to see that progress is not measured by how many people see your work or applaud your journey, but by how deeply you inhabit your own being. The true success of a life is not in its visibility, but in its authenticity. The great tree in the forest grows tall, not because it competes with others, but because it follows its own light. It drinks deeply of the soil and rises effortlessly toward the sun. It doesn't ask the nearby trees for permission. It doesn't compare its leaves. It simply grows, and in that quiet growth, it fulfills its purpose. And what is your purpose? It is to be what you already are, to live this life as fully and as honestly as you can, to bring awareness to whatever is before you, whether that's joy or sorrow, gain or loss, company or solitude. You do not need a grand destiny, you need presence. Presence is life itself, paying attention through you. When you are present, even the smallest act becomes magnificent. Drinking water becomes communion, listening to the wind becomes prayer. Existence stops being a means to an end and becomes the end itself. Many people say they want peace, but what they really want is a peaceful version of control. They want the world to go their way so they can relax. But true peace doesn't depend on conditions. It arises when you stop resisting what is, when you stop demanding that the world reflect your preferences. You begin to see that life has always been perfect in its imperfection. You were never meant to manage existence, only to participate in it. When you let go of control, life begins to feel effortless. And in that effortlessness, you finally discover the very ease you were chasing all along. There will be days when the fog returns, when the path seems unclear, when doubt whispers that you are wasting your time. On those days, remember this: the fog is not an obstacle, it is the path itself. It teaches you to walk by feel, to trust the unseen, to listen for the quiet guidance that is always there beneath the noise. Every step through uncertainty strengthens your connection to something larger than thought. It teaches you faith, not the kind that clings to belief, but the kind that rests in knowing. You begin to trust the rhythm of your own becoming, even when you cannot see where it leads. Do not be afraid of being misunderstood. The deeper your understanding, the fewer people will understand you. This is not isolation, it is evolution. The higher the mountain, the thinner the air. You are meant to breathe that clarity, even if others cannot join you there. Do not descend for comfort. Rise for truth. And when the world seems to move past you, remember that stillness moves in its own way. The seed underground looks dormant, yet it is transforming. The caterpillar inside its cocoon appears lifeless, yet it is being remade. Trust your hidden seasons. The silence is not punishment, it is preparation. And when recognition finally comes, as it often does, you will smile because you no longer need it. Praise will feel like an echo of something you already knew. You will understand that the real reward was not being seen but learning to see, not being loved but becoming love, not being successful but being free. The applause, the achievements, the acknowledgement, all of them will seem small compared to the vastness of the peace you found within. So walk forward, even when no one walks with you, even when no one claps or calls your name. Walk because walking is your nature. Rise because rising is what waves do. Move not because the world demands it, but because life itself moves through you. You are not behind. You were never left out. You are part of a great unfolding, and your role is to let it unfold through you in its own time, in its own rhythm. And when doubt creeps in, remember this simple truth: the eyes of existence are already upon you. The universe is looking through your face, breathing through your lungs, living through your heart. You were never separate, never unseen. You have always been enough. The fog was never there to hide you. It was there to reveal you. When the mist clears, you will find that what you were searching for was not waiting at the top of some mountain, but shining quietly within you all along. Because the moment you stop waiting to be seen is the moment you begin to see. And in that seeing, life begins again.
There is beneath all our cleverness a quiet faculty that no machine can mimic. It is the art of listening to what is not being said. When you step into a room, something stirs long before language begins. You can sense who holds the center of gravity, who hides behind a polite expression, who aches to be seen without daring to say so. This is not analysis. It is awareness, older than the mind itself, It is the body knowing before the mind interferes. Modern life teaches us to speak quickly, to think sharply, to fill every silence with words. But the more noise we make, the more we lose the subtle music underneath it all. Social intelligence is not the power to persuade or impress. It is the quiet attunement to the living current flowing between human beings. When you move from this stillness, others do not merely hear you, they resonate with you. For connection is not made through speech, but through the shared silence beneath it. Most of what passes between human beings is never spoken. The real conversation happens in the pauses, in the soft currents that flow beneath the surface of words. Think of a moment when someone said, "I'm fine," but you felt they weren't. No evidence, no argument, just a quiet knowing in your chest. Or the way a friend's silence felt heavier than any explanation could be. This is where social intelligence lives. Not in clever speeches, but in the spaces between them. We've built a culture that worships language. The louder, the sharper, the better. We teach people to talk, but seldom to listen. And when silence arrives, most grow restless, as though something essential has gone missing. But silence isn't absence. Silence is the ground from which real connection grows. Words are like ripples on water. They reveal movement, but the depth is felt below. When you learn to sense beneath words, you begin to hear the tremor behind a laugh, the hesitation before a yes, the small griefs tucked inside ordinary sentences. To be socially intelligent is to allow yourself to feel these undercurrents without rushing to fix or explain them. It's to be present enough for another person to exhale, not because you solved their problem, but because they finally felt understood. Real connection doesn't happen in speeches. It happens in the quiet recognition that two human beings are breathing the same moment. To move with grace among others, one must first learn the quiet art of knowing oneself. Social intelligence is not a mask you wear to impress. It begins with the stillness within you, the inner compass. When you are at odds with your own emotions, everything outside becomes distorted. A simple look may feel like judgment, a silence like rejection. But when you begin to understand your own tides, anger, fear, longing, joy, you no longer drown in them, you float. And from that calm water, it becomes possible to see others clearly. Emotional intelligence is that inner compass. It's the ability to feel a storm inside without being swept away. But a compass alone is not enough. A sailor who never looks outward will lose the shore. Social intelligence is the map, the ability to navigate the subtle landscapes of other hearts. Every person carries their own weather. Some arrive like sunlight, others like quiet rain. When your inner compass is steady, you can sense their changing skies without confusing them for your own. You begin to notice the tremor in someone's breath, the way their words don't always match their eyes. And rather than reacting, you respond. This is the balance, to know where you stand within and to walk gently in the world without. One keeps you anchored, the other lets you travel far. To read another person is not to pry into them, nor to decode them like a puzzle. It is to stand quietly at the edge of their being and allow yourself to feel the ripples they make in the world. Most people imagine communication as something that happens through words, but the body speaks long before the mouth does. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way someone inhales before answering, the small delay before a smile. All these are little doorways into the unspoken. And you don't need special training to notice them. You only need to stop rushing past what is already there. We live in an age that values quick answers, fast replies, and clever remarks. But the art of reading people belongs to a slower rhythm. It happens when you allow your mind to quiet, your eyes to soften, your presence to stretch beyond your own thoughts. And in that stillness, something extraordinary occurs. People begin to reveal themselves, not because you force them to, but because they feel seen. They feel you're listening. To read people is not to control or manipulate. It's to listen with the whole of your being. To notice when a voice trembles, but the words remain strong. To sense when a silence is tender and when it is full of pain. You don't interpret them, you meet them. The moment you truly see another person, not through the fog of your own judgments, but through quiet attention, something shifts in the air between you. It's almost invisible, like the faint change in temperature before rain. This is where trust begins. Not in grand gestures or elaborate promises, but in the simple human recognition. I am being felt. I am not alone in here. People don't trust because of what you say. They trust because, for a brief moment, they sense that their inner world has been noticed without being handled. It is the rare experience of being understood without being interrupted. This kind of presence is not decoration, it's foundation. When someone feels seen at this level, defenses soften. The walls they spent years building loosen, even just a little. And from that quiet opening, trust begins to take root. Not as an agreement, but as a shared silence between two human beings. Trust is a strange thing. You cannot demand it, you cannot force it, and you cannot bargain for it. It grows the way dawn arrives, slowly, without announcement. Real influence does not belong to the loudest voice in the room, but to the presence that others feel is steady. You've seen it before. Someone speaks softly, and yet the room listens. Not because their words are dazzling, but because people can sense something beneath them. A quiet ground, a sincerity that asks for nothing. Social intelligence isn't about persuading people to bend to your will. It is the art of becoming someone others feel safe to open their world to. Trust is built not through clever arguments, but through the simple consistency of presence. When you truly listen, not to reply, not to prove, but simply to be there, people recognize it immediately. It touches something older than logic. It says, I see you, I'm not here to fix you, I'm here to be with you. And from that trust, influence flows on its own. Not as pressure, but as gravity. Gentle, invisible, effortless. A tree does not convince you of its shade. You simply walk toward it because it stands where it has always stood. So it is with trust. Influence is not the storm. It is the still air that gathers people without a word. Long before we learn to speak, we learn to feel one another. Long before we built cities and systems, we gathered around firelight, reading the flicker in someone's eyes more easily than the words that came after. Connection is not a modern skill. It is the oldest language we share. The rhythm of another's breath, the tremor in their voice, the heaviness or lightness of their silence. Your body knows how to read this. It always has. It is not something you learn so much as something you remember. Modern life often makes us forget. We build walls of analysis, of speed, of distraction. But beneath it all, your nervous system is still listening, still tuning itself to the quiet music between people. When someone is in pain, a part of you aches. When someone laughs, something in you softens. This isn't sentimentality. It is the design of being human. We are wired to connect the way trees lean toward light. And when you allow yourself to trust that instinct, to sense before you speak, to feel before you explain, your interactions become less about control and more about attunement. In that space, conversation turns into something older than language. Two beings remembering they were never truly separate. We live in an age where noise has become the default setting. Not just the restless noise of the world, but the chatter inside the mind that never seems to rest. Everyone is speaking. Few are listening. And in that endless exchange of words, presence is lost. Presence isn't a performance. It isn't about perfect posture, nodding at the right time or pretending to be calm. It's the art of being here fully, without rehearsing what comes next. You felt it before. When someone looks at you, not past you. When their attention doesn't wander. When you feel in the marrow of your being that in this moment you don't have to explain yourself. Their silence is not empty. It is spacious. In a world so addicted to distraction, presence has become rare and therefore powerful. It slows the rhythm of conversation. It turns noise into music. It allows the small, quiet truths in people to rise to the surface without being drowned out. Machines may outthink us, but they cannot be with us. They cannot offer the kind of stillness that makes another human exhale. Presence is not something you build. It's something you stop covering up. And when you offer that kind of space to others, they recognize it immediately. Not with their intellect, but with their soul. What binds us most deeply is rarely spoken. The most honest conversations are carried in the eyes, in the tilt of the head, in the rhythm of a breath shared between two people who need not explain themselves. Empathy isn't a technique. It is the simple act of standing beside another human being without rushing to correct or repair their experience. It is the art of feeling with, not fixing for. When someone is grieving, words often fall short, but a steady hand, a soft gaze, or a quiet presence can speak with a language older than speech itself. We often imagine that influence comes from great speeches or brilliant arguments, yet more often it comes from the silent way we meet another person's heart. To be empathetic is not to drown in another's feeling. It is to let your presence become wide enough to hold it gently, as a river holds the reflection of the moon, without grasping, without claiming, without needing to change it. But empathy without ground becomes a flood. If you lean too far into another's storm, you may lose your footing. And when that happens, compassion turns to confusion, listening turns to reaction. This is where many people falter, not because they don't care, but because they haven't yet learned to stand firm in the winds they invite. To offer true presence is not to carry someone else's pain as your own. It is to hold space for it without becoming it, like a tree that bends but does not break. And it is in these moments, when emotions grow heavy, that the quiet art of emotional mastery begins. Not as control, but as a return to center. From empathy, we step gently into strength. Conflict in itself is not the enemy. It is simply a moment when two worlds meet and neither wishes to disappear. Most people treat conflict as a battlefield, rushing to defend their position, to prove themselves right. But the wise approach it as a mirror. What unsettles us in another often touches something unsteady within ourselves. When anger rises, when pride stiffens the spine, when the voice grows sharp, that is not the moment to conquer the other. It is the moment to return to stillness. Emotional mastery does not mean suppressing feeling. It means meeting it like an old friend who has come to deliver a message. If you can remain steady, when your chest tightens, when your breath grows shallow, you will find that conflict loses its teeth. Your stillness becomes the calm center around which the storm turns. And from this place, listening returns. The other person no longer feels they are fighting against you, but being heard by you. And when listening enters a room, truth becomes possible again. To master emotion is not to harden against life. It is to stand in its waves without losing your balance. When one of you remains anchored, the quarrel slowly remembers its humanity, and what began as tension becomes an opening. What follows is not victory or defeat, but quiet. The air between you no longer strains under the weight of opposing wills. It loosens. A calm begins to shape itself in the space where resistance once lived. This is the quiet strength that does not need to announce itself. When you remain steady in the storm, you become something people lean toward without quite knowing why. It isn't about being wiser or stronger. It's about not leaving yourself. Others may raise their voices, their defenses, their fears, but your stillness does not mirror their storm, like the riverbank beside a rushing current. You give shape to the moment without trying to control the water. In that kind of presence, something in the other person begins to settle too. People rarely remember arguments in detail, but they remember how they felt when they stood near someone who did not fight them back. Safety is not a speech. It's a felt thing, quiet, wordless, and unmistakable. To become a safe space is not to fix others. It is simply to be a place where their walls can rest, where their breath can drop a little lower into the body. And when you carry that steadiness into the world, you stop trying to win people over. They come closer on their own. True social intelligence is not a set of tricks or polished performances. It is not how well you speak, how charming you sound, or how quickly you think. It is the quiet art of being so fully yourself that others feel free to be themselves too. All the techniques, reading people, building trust, mastering emotion, they are only different doors that lead back to the same place, presence. The presence that listens more than it explains. The presence that steadies rather than reacts. The presence that does not need to win to be strong. When people leave your company, they will not replay your perfect sentences. They will remember how they felt around you, whether they could breathe a little easier, whether they felt seen, whether they felt safe. And that is the real power here, not to shine above others, but to become a space where they no longer need to defend themselves. Social intelligence is not learned in books alone. It is remembered in the silence between words, in the calm between storms, in the stillness you carry inside. When you embody that, you no longer need to try to connect. Connection happens on its own.
You see, one of the curious things about human beings is that we live in the middle of a conversation without realizing it. Life is speaking all the time, whispering in gestures, in pauses, in little accidents of timing. But most of us are so busy chattering inside our own heads that we hardly hear a word. It is like being at a symphony and spending the entire concert tapping on your phone, then complaining afterward that the orchestra never played anything worth hearing. The music was there all along, but you were elsewhere. The universe is forever hinting, pointing, nudging. It does not usually shout, for shouting would defeat the purpose. It speaks instead in quiet ways, subtle ways, ways that you can easily dismiss if you are intent on dismissing them. And yet, those who learn to notice, those who learn to listen, begin to see that nothing is ever random. Every detail is a sign, if only you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Now, when I say sign, I don't mean a mystical telegram delivered from the heavens in secret code. I mean that the fabric of existence itself is patterned, woven in such a way that events echo each other, symbols repeat, and your inner condition reflects itself in what you meet outside. When you are restless, the world around you seems full of agitation. When you are calm, the same streets, the same sky, the same faces, all appear different. This is not coincidence, but resonance. The inside and the outside are two sides of one thing, like the crest and the trough of a wave. So when the universe sends a sign, it is not something alien imposed from above, but the reflection of your own being rippling through the whole. Think of the times when life has nudged you through synchronicity. You are thinking of an old friend, and just then the phone rings, and it is them. You are wrestling with a question, and a book falls open to a passage that addresses it directly. You are standing at a crossroads, and suddenly the wind shifts, a bird cries, a stranger glances in your direction, and somehow you know which way to turn. Now, the rational mind is quick to sneer at such moments, to call them coincidence or projection. But the deeper mind, the one that listens with the whole body, knows better. For in such moments there is a taste, a fragrance of significance. You feel it not as logic, but as resonance. It is as if the world is leaning in, whispering in your ear, this way. But because we are so trained to trust only what is loud, only what is measurable, we tend to ignore the whisper. We are like someone standing in a forest, headphones blasting, while the trees rustle secrets and the stream sings wisdom, and we hear none of it. We demand that life explain itself in clear language, in bold letters, when all along it prefers to speak in the rustle of leaves, in the flicker of light, in the timing of an encounter. And so we overlook the very guidance we claim to seek. It is rather like looking for your spectacles while wearing them on your nose. You search everywhere, growing more frantic, because you assume that what you need must be somewhere else, when all the while it is already here. The signs of the universe are like that, too near, too constant, too obvious. They do not announce themselves with fanfare. They are woven into the ordinary, into the everyday, into the pattern of life as it already is. And because we expect something dramatic, something miraculous, we dismiss them as nothing. We imagine that if the universe truly had something to say, it would send a thunderbolt, a voice from the sky, a miracle impossible to ignore. But that is not the way of things. Thunderbolts are crude. Miracles are too theatrical. Life prefers the delicate, the understated, the signs so quiet that only those who are attentive can perceive it. There is a story about a man who prayed earnestly for guidance. He begged the heavens for a sign. Day after day, he pleaded, "Tell me what to do, show me the way." But no booming voice answered, no vision appeared in the clouds. Instead, he noticed a child smiling at him, a bird alighting near his path, a stranger offering a small kindness. He dismissed them all as irrelevant. Only later did he realize those were the answers. They were subtle, but they were real. The universe does not often speak in the language of drama. It speaks in the language of the moment. And if you are not present to the moment, you miss it entirely. So the first condition for hearing the signs is presence. To be here, to actually notice what is happening instead of living always in memory or anticipation. Most of us are half asleep, moving through life as though it were a rehearsal for something else, preoccupied with what has been or what might be, and therefore blind to what is. But what is where the signs appear. They do not appear in the past, for the past is gone. They do not appear in the future, for the future is not yet. They appear now, in this breath, in this glance, in this coincidence. To notice them, you must wake up to now. But waking up is not a matter of effort, of straining your eyes to see or cocking your ears to hear. It is more like relaxing into a broader awareness, letting the edges soften so that the whole field of experience can show itself. When you are tense, intent on a narrow goal, you see only what fits that goal. When you relax, you begin to notice the things that are not directly useful, but deeply meaningful. The way a shadow falls, the way a phrase echoes, the way a silence deepens. These are not useful in the sense of getting you ahead, but they are useful in the sense of orienting you in the greater dance of life. Consider how animals listen. A cat does not strain its ears to hear. It relaxes, alert yet at ease, and so it catches the faintest rustle. A bird does not analyze the wind. It feels it with its whole body and moves accordingly. In just this way, if you relax your grip on the world begins to reveal its signs to you. The key is not to force, but to allow. Not to demand, but to notice. Yet here lies the difficulty. Our culture teaches us to ignore the subtle. We are trained to prize only what is measurable, only what can be proven. And so we dismiss the intuitive, the coincidental, the symbolic as superstition. We prefer charts and data to dreams and synchronicities. But this is like insisting that music is only the notes written on a score, while ignoring the silence between them, the mood of the performance, the shimmer of the sound in the air. Yes, you can measure frequencies and write formulas, but none of that captures the actual experience of the music. And in the same way, you can measure causes and effects, but that does not exhaust the meaning of events. For meaning is not in the bare fact, but in the resonance, the way it touches you, the way it reflects your inner state. Think of déjà vu, those moments when you feel you have lived something before. Rationally, you dismiss it as a trick of memory, but experientially, it carries a weight, a charge, as though some deeper pattern were briefly revealed. That charge, that significance, is itself the sign. It need not be explained, only noticed. Or think of the way numbers sometimes repeat in your life, the clock always catching your eye at the same hour, the same digits appearing in unexpected places. Skeptics call it coincidence, but to you, it feels like a wink, a nod, a rhythm. That feeling of rhythm is the universe's way of speaking. But because we demand explanations, we miss the poetry. We want to pin everything down, to know exactly what a sign means. Yet signs do not usually come with a dictionary. They are more like metaphors, open, suggestive, pointing, rather than declaring. A dream does not hand you a definition. It hands you an image, and that image works on you from within. So too with the signs of the universe. They are not there to give you a neat instruction manual, but to awaken your deeper intuition, to remind you that you are not separate, that you are woven into the whole. You see, when you ask for a sign, what you are really asking is to be reminded of your own belonging. You want to know that you are not adrift in a meaningless void, and the universe answers again and again with reminders. The question is whether you are willing to notice. Most of us are not, because noticing requires stillness, and stillness is frightening. In stillness, all the noise dies down, and we are left face to face with ourselves. And that, for many, is unbearable. So we fill our lives with chatter, distraction, endless doing, and then we complain that life never speaks to us. But it has been speaking all along. It is we who have been too loud to hear. Now, it is important to realize that not every coincidence is a divine telegram. Not every shadow on the wall is a message. But if you attune yourself to the whole, you begin to sense the difference between empty noise and meaningful resonance. It is like learning to appreciate art. At first, you see only colors on a canvas. With time, you begin to feel the composition, the mood, the style. In the same way, when you begin to notice the signs, you develop a taste for them. You sense when something is charged with significance, when it is part of a larger pattern, and when it is not. This is not superstition, but sensitivity. It is not credulity, but awareness. And once you develop this sensitivity, you realize that the universe has been whispering all along. It whispers in the way certain people appear at just the right moment. It whispers in the way setbacks redirect you toward paths you had not considered. It whispers in the way ordinary objects suddenly shine with extraordinary relevance. And the more you listen, the more you discover that the signs are not rare exceptions, but constant companions. Life is a language, and everything in it is a word. The trick is to stop insisting that it speak only in grammar you already understand. Now, why do we keep ignoring these signs? In part because we are afraid of what they might demand. To acknowledge that the universe speaks is to acknowledge that we are not the sole authors of our lives. It is to admit that we are participants in a greater pattern, not masters standing outside it. And that can be unsettling, for it means surrendering the illusion of control. So it is easier to dismiss the signs, to say, "Oh, that was nothing," than to face the possibility that life itself is alive, responsive, intimate. For if life is speaking, then you must learn to listen. And listening requires humility. It requires setting aside your certainties, your insistence on being right, and opening to mystery. And mystery, though beautiful, is uncomfortable. Yet to ignore the signs is to cut yourself off from half of life. It is like refusing to listen to music because you cannot measure its meaning with a ruler. You reduce yourself to a world of noise, stripped of poetry, stripped of resonance. And though you may succeed in being practical, you will also find yourself restless, unsatisfied, as though something essential were missing. That something is the recognition that life is not just happening to you, but with you. That you are not merely a spectator, but a participant in a dialogue as old as time. So, the first great discovery is simply this: the universe is always sending signs. They are not grandiose, they are not theatrical, but they are everywhere. The question is whether you are willing to notice, to slow down, to open your senses, and to let the whispers in. And the tragedy is that most people, most of the time, do not. They keep ignoring, dismissing, explaining away, and so they live in a world stripped of magic, not because magic is absent, but because they have closed their eyes to it. It is a peculiar irony that what we ignore most easily is often what we most deeply need. We chase after dramatic revelations, great truths announced with trumpets, and yet overlook the quiet intimations that life is giving us moment by moment. But to live in harmony with existence is not to demand grand signs. It is to become sensitive to the subtle, to recognize that the whisper is more faithful than the shout. And so, when we begin to awaken from our habitual blindness, the question arises, how do we learn again to listen? How do we train ourselves not to keep missing the signals that are already present? The first thing to understand is that listening is not an action in the ordinary sense. It is not straining, not grasping, not putting pressure on yourself to discover some hidden meaning. Listening, in its deepest sense, is allowing. It is a posture of openness, of readiness, without interference. Just as the ear does not need to tug sound into itself, but simply receives, so the heart does not need to drag meaning into awareness, but simply allows it to arrive. This is why children, before they have been taught to mistrust, often notice signs instinctively. They will stop and marvel at a feather on the ground, at a curious alignment of stones, at the way the clouds resemble some shape in their imagination. To the adult, this is dismissed as play, as fantasy. But to the child, it is reality shimmering with significance. And the truth is, the child is not wrong. It is we who have been trained into dullness. So, to rediscover the signs, we must in some way rediscover that childlike gaze, not childish in its naivety, but childlike in its receptivity, its willingness to be astonished by the ordinary. And one way to cultivate this is through attention to the small. You see, we imagine that wisdom is always found in the grand, in the vast, in the exalted, but the subtle is the gateway. If you attend to the small, the larger reveals itself. Watch the way a candle flame flickers in the draught, and you begin to feel the entire movement of the air in the room. Listen to the pattern of footsteps on the street, and you hear the rhythm of human life passing. Notice the breath entering and leaving your own lungs, and you sense the great exchange of atmosphere that binds all creatures together. To notice such things is not trivial. It is the beginning of reverence, and reverence is the beginning of listening. Now, when you cultivate this awareness, you will inevitably begin to notice patterns that seem to follow you, symbols that repeat, coincidences that gather like constellations. Do not rush to label them, to demand their meaning. Simply notice. Let them accumulate as stars accumulate in the night sky until a pattern begins to reveal itself naturally. If you grasp too soon, you will force a meaning that may not be true. But if you allow, the pattern will speak in its own time. Just as you cannot force a flower to bloom by pulling at its petals, you cannot force a sign to reveal its meaning by impatient analysis. Patience is itself part of the listening. It is also vital to remember that signs are not separate from you. They are not external instructions imposed by some distant authority. They are reflections, resonances, expressions of the same process of which you are a part. When a coincidence occurs, it is not the universe trying to send you a coded message in a language foreign to you. It is the universe speaking your own language, the language of your own state of being. And so to listen to the signs is also to listen to yourself, not the narrow self of the ego, but the larger self that is continuous with the whole. This is why the more honest you are with yourself, the clearer the signs appear. If you are living in denial, if you are hiding from your own truth, then the signs will appear confusing, contradictory, elusive. But when you are willing to see yourself as you are, the signs line up with remarkable clarity. Yet here is the paradox. We often recognize the signs only in hindsight. How many times have you looked back on a path you have walked and realized that the signs were there all along? You ignored the warning, dismissed the nudge, overlooked the invitation, and only later did you see how it all made sense. This too is part of the process. For sometimes the sign must be ignored in order to teach you the cost of ignoring. Sometimes the lesson is not in the guidance itself, but in the missing of it. Life does not punish you for failing to see, it teaches you through the very failure. And so, even the overlooking of signs is itself a sign, a teacher in disguise. There is no outside of the conversation. Even your deafness is part of the dialogue. But when you begin to live with awareness, something extraordinary happens. You find that guidance becomes constant. You are no longer waiting for rare moments of synchronicity. The whole of life becomes synchronicity. The line between ordinary and extraordinary dissolves. The way a stranger glances at you on the train, the way a song lyric drifts through a cafe, the way the wind shifts just as you are pondering a choice, all of these begin to weave together into a tapestry. And in that tapestry, you feel held guided, accompanied. You realize that you are never outside the embrace of meaning. This realization can be overwhelming, for it changes the way you walk through the world. No longer do you see yourself as a lonely fragment struggling in a void. You see yourself as part of a vast conversation, a play of signs and symbols in which you are both actor and audience. And this realization is not only comforting, it is liberating, for it frees you from the need to control everything, to know everything in advance. You can trust that life itself is participating with you, that you are not alone in your unfolding. Still, trust is the hardest part. For we have been so conditioned to doubt, to insist on proof, that when signs appear, we second-guess them. We ask, was that real or just my imagination? But imagination itself is one of the ways the universe speaks. The distinction between real and imagined is not as clear-cut as we like to believe. Dreams, intuitions, images that arise spontaneously, these are not to be dismissed. They are part of the same field of consciousness in which events occur. If you insist that only the physical counts, you cut yourself off from half of reality. But if you allow imagination to speak alongside events, you discover a richer, more layered conversation. The dream you had last night, the coincidence that met you this morning, the feeling in your body as you walked into a room together, they form a chorus. And that chorus is the voice of the universe as it moves through you. So learning to listen is not about looking for signs in some remote, mystical realm. It is about learning to live so fully present that you cannot help but notice the signs that are already here. It is about softening the boundaries between inside and outside, so that what happens in your heart and what happens in the world are seen as one movement. It is about letting go of the demand for certainty and allowing meaning to reveal itself in its own time. Above all, it is about trust. Trust that life is not indifferent, but intimate, not meaningless, but meaningful, not silent, but endlessly speaking. And here, perhaps, is the deepest lesson. The universe does not send signs because it wants you to follow some rigid path, some pre-written script. It sends signs because it delights in dancing with you. Life is not a test you must pass, but a conversation you are invited to join. The signs are not commands, they are invitations. They do not say, you must do this, but come this way, see what happens. And you are free to decline. You are free to ignore. You are free even to rebel. Yet whatever you choose, life will keep speaking. If you turn left when the sign suggested right, life will not abandon you. It will simply meet you on the left, and new signs will appear. For the conversation never ends. The universe does not demand obedience. It invites participation. And that, you see, is far more beautiful, for it means you are not a puppet on a string, but a partner in a dance. The signs are the steps, the rhythms, the gestures that guide you, but you are free to improvise, to play, to discover. And in that improvisation, life itself is enriched. So, if you wish to stop ignoring the signs, do not treat them as orders. Treat them as invitations to intimacy. Treat them as reminders that you are part of something vast, something alive, something endlessly playful. Let them awaken in you a sense of wonder, a sense of belonging, a sense of trust. For in the end, the signs are not pointing to something outside of you. They are pointing you back to yourself, back to the self that is not separate from the whole. They are reminding you that you are already home,